What Churchill said when Patton crushed 50,000 Germans at Metz, November 22nd, 1944. Winston Churchill sat in his map room in London, studying reports from eastern France. A cigar burned in his hand. Before him lay intelligence briefings about a battle that military experts said was impossible. General George S. Patton was attacking Metz, a fortress city that hadn't fallen to direct assault in over 1,300 years. And he was winning. Welcome back. Today we're diving into one of World War II's most brutal and overlooked campaigns, the Battle of Metz. This wasn't the glamorous race across France. This was bloody, grinding urban warfare against fortifications that had defended the city since Roman times. This was Patton doing what everyone said couldn't be done, taking a fortress that had broken every army that tried. Set up the stakes. Metz wasn't just another French city. It was a symbol. For 73 years since Germany seized it in 1871, Metz had been German. Its fortifications had been strengthened by the best military engineers in Europe. It had 43 major forts ringing the city, hundreds of bunkers, miles of underground tunnels, and a garrison of elite German troops who believed the fortress was impregnable. The German propaganda machine had told the world, Metz cannot fall, it has never fallen, it will never fall. Patton's Third Army stood at its gates in September 1944, exhausted from their race across France, low on supplies, facing weather that turned the battlefield into a quagmire. Every military textbook said, bypass fortified cities, don't attack them directly. Lay siege if you must, but don't waste men on frontal assaults. Patton looked at Metz and said, we're taking it! Preview what's coming. In the next 30 minutes, we'll show you why Metz mattered so much to both sides. We'll take you through Patton's controversial decision to attack rather than bypass. We'll reveal the brutal urban combat that followed, some of the worst fighting of the Western Front. We'll show you how American forces adapted tactics, how they cracked forts that had stood for centuries, and how 50,000 German defenders were killed, wounded, or captured. And we'll tell you what Winston Churchill said when he heard the news, words that captured both admiration and concern about Patton's methods. This is the story of America's bloodiest urban battle in Europe, fought in the autumn mud and winter cold against an enemy who believed they couldn't lose. The fortress city, Metz, through history. To understand the Battle of Metz, you need to understand what Metz was. This wasn't just a city with some walls. This was one of the most fortified places on Earth. The Romans fortified Metz 2,000 years ago. Medieval builders added walls. In the 16th century, Metz withstood a siege by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. At the height of his power, commanding the largest army in Europe, he couldn't take Metz. The city's defenders held out until winter and disease forced Charles to withdraw. In 1552, a French chronicler wrote, Metz is the door that cannot be forced, the wall that cannot be breached, the city that cannot be taken. For the next 300 years, that remained true. German Metz, 1871 to 1944. In 1871, after defeating France in the Franco-Prussian War, Germany annexed Alsace-Lorraine, including Metz. For the Germans, Metz wasn't just strategically important. It was symbolic of German military dominance over France. Between 1871 and 1914, German military engineers transformed Metz into a modern fortress. They built a ring of 43 major forts around the city, massive concrete and steel structures with artillery that could fire for miles. They built hundreds of smaller bunkers and strongpoints. They created an interconnected system of underground tunnels, allowing defenders to move unseen between positions. When World War I began, the French desperately wanted to recapture Metz. They tried in 1914. They failed. The fortress held throughout the entire war, never seriously threatened, despite 4 years of combat. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles returned Metz to France. The French found the German fortifications so impressive they largely left them intact, simply manning them with French troops. In 1940, when Germany invaded France, Metz fell without a fight. The French garrison withdrew before the German advance. Hitler stood in Metz and declared, "This fortress has returned to the Reich. It will remain German forever." The fortress in 1944. By September 1944, Metz had been reinforced yet again. The Germans knew the Allies were coming. They prepared accordingly. The city's defences consisted of outer ring, 28 major forts in a circle, 10 to 15 miles from the city centre. These included Fort Driant, Fort Jeanne d'Arc, Fort Verdun, and Fort Saint-Privat. Each was a self-contained fortress with artillery, machine guns, ammunition stores, and barracks for hundreds of men. Inner ring, 15 additional forts closer to the city. These protected the urban core and the vital bridges across the Moselle River. The citadel. In the city centre, a medieval fortress updated with modern weapons. The last redoubt, if all else failed. Underground network. Miles of tunnels connecting the forts, allowing defenders to reinforce threatened positions without exposing themselves to artillery. The forts themselves were engineering marvels and nightmares for attackers. Thick concrete walls that could withstand direct artillery hits. Steel turrets housing artillery pieces that could retract underground for protection. Interlocking fields of fire that created killing zones around each fort. Underground barracks, ammunition storage, and even hospitals. Taking just one of these forts would be difficult. Taking all of them seemed impossible. The garrison commanding the Metz garrison, General Hermann Balck, one of Germany's most capable defensive commanders. Under him, approximately 50,000 German troops from various units, some elite, some second-rate, but all fighting for a city their propaganda had told them could never fall. Balck received clear orders from Hitler. Metz must not fall. It is a fortress. Hold it at all costs. Every street, every building, every bunker must be defended to the last man. Balck looked at his fortifications and believed it could be done. He sent a message to German High Command. Metz is ready. Let them come. Patton's dilemma. September 1944. The halt. When Patton's Third Army reached the Moselle River in early September 1944, they were exhausted. They had raced 400 miles across France in less than a month. They had liberated Paris. They were on a roll, but they had outrun their supply lines, fuel was scarce, ammunition was rationed. General Eisenhower had prioritized supplies for British Field Marshal Montgomery's Operation Market Garden in the north. Patton was told to go on the defensive and wait. Patton hated waiting. Looking at his maps, Patton saw Metz. The city sat astride the Moselle River, blocking the most direct route to the German Saar region and the Rhine beyond. If he bypassed Metz to the north or south, the German garrison could threaten his supply lines. If he laid siege, it could take months. Standard military doctrine was clear: bypass fortified positions when possible, isolate them, let them wither. Don't waste men attacking prepared defences. Patton made a different calculation. The argument for attacking. In Patton's view, several factors argued for attacking Metz directly. Strategic. Metz controlled the crossing of the Moselle. Taking it would secure Third Army's right flank and open the route to Germany. Symbolic. Metz's fall would be a massive psychological blow to Germany. A fortress that had never fallen in direct assault would demonstrate that nothing could stop the Allied advance. Psychological. Patton believed in momentum. He feared that if Third Army went static, waiting at Metz, they'd lose the offensive spirit. Men who stopped attacking became men who stopped moving. He wanted to keep pushing. Practical. Winter was coming. If Third Army didn't take Metz now, they'd be stuck besieging it through the winter while the Germans reinforced the Siegfried Line further east. Patton called his corps commanders together. We're taking Metz. Not bypassing, not besieging, taking. His staff was appalled. The opposition. Major General Walton Walker, commanding XX Corps, was assigned the mission. He was sceptical. General, Metz hasn't fallen to direct assault since the 3rd century. The Germans have had 3 years to prepare defences. We don't have enough artillery, ammunition, or air support for this kind of operation. Patton cut him off. Then we'll adapt. We'll find a way. Metz is going to fall, and it's going to fall to the Third Army. Make it happen. Even Patton's own intelligence officers advised against it. A briefing document from September 1944 stated, "The Metz forts are among the strongest defensive positions in Europe. Frontal assault is not recommended. Estimated casualties for such an operation, prohibitive." Patton read the briefing and wrote in the margin, "We don't estimate casualties, we win battles." Eisenhower's position. When word reached Eisenhower that Patton intended to assault Metz, the Supreme Commander was concerned but conflicted. He trusted Patton's tactical instincts, but he also knew resources were tight. Every shell fired at Metz was a shell not available elsewhere. Eisenhower's response was diplomatic. If you can take Metz quickly, fine. But I can't give you priority for supplies. Market garden comes first. You'll have to make do with what you have. Patton accepted the terms. He would take Metz with limited supplies, limited support, and against all conventional military wisdom. September 19th, 1944. Third Army began its assault on Metz. The initial attacks. The first attacks were probing actions, testing the defences. American infantry approached the outer forts, supported by tanks and artillery. The Germans waited until the Americans were close, then opened fire. The result was carnage. Machine gun fire from mutually supporting bunkers caught American infantry in crossfires. Artillery from the forts rained down with devastating accuracy. The Germans had pre-registered every approach, every possible avenue of attack. American tanks found that their shells bounced off the thick concrete walls. Within days, it was clear this wasn't going to be quick. Fort Driant, the bloody lesson. The attack on Fort Driant. Fort Driant sat on high ground south of Metz, dominating the surrounding terrain. Patton decided it would be the first to fall. He assigned the 5th Infantry Division to take it. The division's commander looked at Fort Driant and saw a fortress designed to resist exactly what he was about to attempt. The fort's walls were 6 feet of reinforced concrete. Its artillery turrets could swivel to fire in any direction. Its underground chambers housed hundreds of German defenders. The approaches were covered by minefields and barbed wire. But orders were orders. September 27th, 1944. The assault began. The battle. American infantry advanced across open ground toward the fort. German artillery opened up. Men fell. The survivors pressed on. They reached the fort's outer defences and found themselves facing machine gun nests that seemed to sprout from every angle. Engineers tried to blow gaps in the walls. The explosions barely scratched the concrete. Flamethrowers were brought up. They cleared some bunkers but couldn't penetrate the main structure. American artillery pounded the fort for hours. When the smoke cleared, the fort was still there, still firing. For 3 days, American troops fought to get inside Fort Driant. They cleared the surface structures, fighting room to room through bunkers and trenches. But the main fort was underground. The Germans retreated into the subterranean galleries, sealed the entrances, and continued fighting. American troops found themselves in a nightmare. The underground passages were pitch black, filled with acrid smoke from explosions, and defended by Germans who knew every inch of the tunnels. Grenade battles in total darkness. Close quarters combat with pistols and knives, men getting lost in the maze-like tunnels. The cost. After a week of fighting, the 5th Infantry Division had suffered over 800 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. They held some of Fort Driant's surface structures but couldn't completely reduce the fort. German defenders still occupied the underground chambers, and they weren't coming out. On October 13th, Patton made a painful decision: withdraw from Fort Driant. It was the first time in the war he had ordered a retreat. Patton was furious, but also chastened. Fort Driant had taught him that Metz wouldn't fall to courage alone. It would require new tactics, massive firepower, and grinding persistence. Patton's response. After Fort Driant, Patton called a conference of his commanders. "Gentlemen, we're going to take Metz, but we're going to do it right. No more piecemeal attacks. We're going to bring up every gun we have. We're going to bomb every fort from the air. We're going to isolate the city, then crush it systematically." He paused, then added, "And it's going to cost us, but it's going to cost the Germans more." The Battle of Metz was about to enter its most brutal phase. The siege. October preparation. Throughout October, as rain turned the battlefield to mud, Patton assembled his forces for a proper assault on Metz. He brought up artillery, hundreds of guns, including heavy pieces capable of smashing concrete. He coordinated with the Air Force for bombing missions. He stockpiled ammunition. The plan was straightforward: isolate Metz by taking the surrounding forts, then assault the city itself. But every fort would be a battle. The weather. October and November 1944 brought some of the worst weather of the war. Rain fell almost constantly. The Moselle River swelled, the ground turned into a swamp. Tanks bogged down, infantry slogged through knee-deep mud, foxholes filled with water. German defenders, safe in their concrete forts with roofs over their heads, had a huge advantage. American troops attacking across open ground were miserable, cold, wet, and exhausted before they even engaged the enemy. But Patton wouldn't stop. "Weather's the same for everyone," he told his commanders. "We keep attacking." The November Offensive. November 8, 1944, the main assault on Metz began. 3 divisions, the 5th, 90th, and 95th Infantry, attacked from different directions. The strategy was to overwhelm the defenders by hitting multiple forts simultaneously, preventing the Germans from concentrating their forces. The artillery preparation was the heaviest of the Third Army's campaign. For hours, American guns pounded the forts. Then fighter bombers arrived, dropping 500-pound bombs on the fortifications. The ground shook. Smoke obscured everything. Then the infantry went in. Fort by fort. The fighting followed a pattern. First, artillery and airstrikes to suppress the defenders. Then infantry and engineers would advance, using Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps in wire and mines. Combat engineers with flamethrowers and satchel charges would assault the surface structures. Once the surface was cleared, the grim work of clearing the underground galleries began. Fort Jeanne d'Arc. Taken after 3 days of fighting. American casualties, 127. Fort de Cueuleux. Overrun in 2 days. The German garrison held out in the underground chambers until American engineers sealed the entrances, trapping them inside. After 24 hours without air, they surrendered. Fort Saint-Quentin. The garrison fought to the last man. When American troops finally entered, they found 127 German dead and no prisoners. The fort had been defended to annihilation. Urban warfare. While the forts fell one by one, American troops also fought into the city itself. Metz's urban area was a defender's paradise. Stone buildings that could be turned into strongpoints, narrow streets that channeled attackers into kill zones, and a German garrison determined to hold every block. American infantry learned urban warfare the hard way. They discovered that tanks were vulnerable in city streets. A Panzerfaust, German anti-tank weapon, could destroy a Sherman from a second-story window. They learned to advance building by building, floor by floor, room by room. The technique that emerged: suppress the building with machine gun fire, then send an assault team. One man would throw a grenade through the door or window. The team would rush in immediately after the explosion, clear the first floor, then move to the second. If a building was too heavily defended, call in tank fire to blast holes in the walls, or request artillery to bring the building down entirely. It was exhausting. Dangerous work. Every building could be an ambush. Every door could hide an enemy. The crossing. Metz sat on both sides of the Moselle River, connected by bridges the Germans had prepared for demolition. American forces needed to cross quickly before the bridges were destroyed. On November 14th, elements of the 5th Infantry Division made a daring assault crossing. Engineers threw pontoon bridges across the river under fire. Infantry scrambled across, established a bridgehead, and held it against German counterattacks. Within 24 hours, American forces were fighting on both sides of the river. Metz was being encircled. The German defense. General Balck fought skillfully with limited resources. He shuffled his remaining forces from threatened sector to threatened sector, always managing to have troops where the Americans attacked. But he was slowly being overwhelmed. By mid-November, Balck sent a message to German High Command. "Metz cannot hold indefinitely. Request permission to withdraw garrison to stronger positions east of the city." Hitler's response was predictable. Metz will be held to the last man. There will be no withdrawal. Balck knew what that meant. His garrison was being sentenced to death or capture. The fall, November 18th, 22, the end. By November 18th, most of the outer forts had fallen. The city itself was largely in American hands. German defenders held isolated strongpoints, a few forts, the citadel, some fortified buildings, but they were cut off and surrounded. Patton wanted the city officially secured before Thanksgiving, November 23rd. He pushed his commanders relentlessly. Fort Driant falls. Remember Fort Driant, the fort that had repulsed the first assault in September. In mid-November, American forces returned. This time, they brought overwhelming firepower. After days of bombardment, the garrison, what was left of it, surrendered. When American troops entered the underground chambers, they found evidence of the siege's brutality. Wounded men who had died for lack of medical care. Ammunition and food nearly exhausted, and German defenders who had held out for weeks in the darkness, knowing no relief was coming. The Citadel, November 22nd. The final stronghold was the medieval citadel in the city centre. Its garrison, about 800 men, refused to surrender. American artillery began systematic destruction of the citadel's walls. After hours of bombardment, a German officer emerged under a white flag. The garrison would surrender if their honour was respected, if they could march out with weapons shouldered. The American commander agreed, better to end it cleanly than lose more men in a final assault. On November 22, 1944, the German garrison marched out of the citadel, laid down their arms, and surrendered. After 73 years of German occupation, after centuries as an impregnable fortress, Metz had fallen. The cost. The Battle of Metz cost the Third Army dearly. American casualties, approximately 2,400 killed, 13,000 wounded, 2,000 missing or captured. Total, over 17,000 casualties. German casualties, approximately 14,500 killed or wounded, 37,000 captured, including those captured when Metz was fully cleared in early December. Total. Over 50,000 German troops eliminated as a fighting force. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the Western Front, and one of the least remembered. Patton's reaction. When told that Metz had officially fallen, Patton's response was uncharacteristically subdued. He had won, but the cost had been higher than he'd expected. The battle had taken nearly 3 months instead of the few weeks he'd anticipated. He wrote in his diary, "The capture of Metz was a magnificent achievement. No city had ever stood longer against attack. But I wish we could have done it faster, with fewer casualties. Every man lost is a man who won't see home." Again. Still, Patton had done what everyone said couldn't be done. Metz, the impregnable fortress, had fallen to direct assault for the first time in 300 years. Churchill's response and legacy. What Churchill said. When news reached London that Metz had fallen, Winston Churchill was briefed by his military staff. The briefing included casualty figures, time frame, and strategic impact. Churchill listened, then spoke words that captured the complexity of his feelings about Patton. "General Patton has accomplished what no army has done in a millennium. He has taken Metz by storm. The Germans fortified that city for 70 years, believing it impregnable. Patton has proven them wrong. This is a remarkable achievement." He paused, puffing his cigar, then continued with concern evident in his voice. "But at what cost? 17,000 American casualties for one city. In the Great War, we learned the terrible price of attacking fortifications directly. I had hoped we had learned those lessons. Patton has won, yes, but he has won by spending lives as currency. I admire his audacity, but I question his method." Churchill's chief military advisor, General Alan Brooke, later wrote in his diary, "The PM is conflicted about Patton. He recognizes the man's military genius, but he fears Patton's aggressive instincts lead him to fight battles that could be won more economically. Metz was taken, but was it worth 17,000 casualties?" The British perspective. The British, scarred by the trenches of World War I and the grinding battles of World War II, tended toward caution. Churchill himself had been responsible for the Gallipoli disaster in 1915, where attacking fortified positions head-on led to catastrophic casualties. He was haunted by that failure, so when Churchill looked at Metz, he saw victory, yes, but also echoes of past disasters. He saw courage rewarded, but at tremendous cost. He saw the difference between American and British military philosophy. Americans willing to accept high casualties for quick victories, British preferring slower advances with lower losses. Patton's defence. Patton, when told of Churchill's mixed response, was defensive. He argued that bypassing Metz would have left a German garrison threatening Third Army's supply lines throughout the winter. He argued that the strategic benefits, opening the route to the Saar and the Rhine, justified the cost. He argued that the psychological impact of taking an impregnable fortress demoralized German defenders elsewhere. In a letter to Eisenhower, Patton wrote, "Every battle costs lives. That's the nature of war. The question isn't whether men will die, it's whether their sacrifice achieves something meaningful. Metz was meaningful. We eliminated 50,000 German soldiers from the fight. We opened the road to Germany. We proved that no fortress can stop us. That's worth the price we paid." The strategic impact. Militarily, Metz's fall had significant consequences. It secured Third Army's right flank, allowing further operations toward the Siegfried Line and the Saar. It eliminated a major German garrison that could have threatened Allied communications. It demonstrated that German fortifications, no matter how strong, could be overcome with American firepower and determination. But the battle also revealed limitations. It showed that even with massive material superiority, attacking prepared defences was costly. It demonstrated that fortresses, if properly defended, could slow offensives significantly. It raised questions about whether the Allied strategy of continuous attack was always the right approach. The forgotten battle. Today, the Battle of Metz is largely forgotten. It lacks the drama of D-Day, the symbolism of the Battle of the Bulge, or the clarity of final victory. It was a grinding urban battle in the rain and mud, a fight that didn't fit the narrative of a clean, swift Allied victory. But for the men who fought there, it was one of the war's most intense experiences. The 5th, 90th, and 95th Infantry Divisions earned their reputation in Metz's streets and forts. They learned that wars aren't won by glory. They're won by soldiers willing to advance into machine gun fire, to clear bunkers room by room, to endure cold and exhaustion and fear, and to keep fighting. The legacy. What's the lesson of Metz? Perhaps it's that military history is more complex than we like to admit. Patton won, but victory came at a price. Churchill was right to admire the achievement and question the cost. Both perspectives are valid. Metz teaches us that there are no easy answers in war. Sometimes attacking is necessary, sometimes the cost is high. Sometimes commanders must balance victory against casualties, speed against caution, audacity against prudence. Patton chose audacity. Metz fell. 50,000 Germans were eliminated from the war, and 17,000 American families received telegrams telling them their sons, husbands, and fathers weren't coming home. History remembers the victory. We should also remember the cost. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the Battle of Metz. If you found this video informative, please like, subscribe, and share. Leave a comment below. Do you think Patton made the right decision to attack Metz directly? Was the cost worth it? Let's discuss the complexity of command decisions in war. Until next time, remember, history's greatest victories often come at prices that make us question whether winning was worth it. That's not defeatism. That's understanding the true cost of war.